So welcome everyone to the third lecture of the second module of this training course, which is focused on water quality and human health. Just a reminder, we have a YouTube channel. I've already put the link in the chat. So if you want to subscribe to that, you will get notifications when recordings of the lectures are put online. And I think TJ just put Shuba's presentation online, so you can rewatch any of the lectures there. During Grinsen's talk, today's talk, you can post your questions in the chat, and we will collate them and ask them after the lecture, and Grinsen and the rest of the panel will have the opportunity to answer. So just please feel free to post any questions in the chat while Grinsen is talking. So today's lecture is from Dr. Grinsen George. He is a principal scientist at the Central Marine Fisheries Research Institute in Kochi in India since 2018. He recently was on deputation as a senior program specialist to the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation Agriculture Center in Dhaka, where he coordinated the fisheries and aquaculture programs for 8 South Asian nations. And he has been active in teaching, research, policy, administration, academics, and industry related to fisheries and aquaculture for over 23 years. He specializes in fisheries resource management, and he completed his postdoctoral research at Plymouth Marine Laboratory in the United Kingdom. So he's a familiar face to many of us. He served as the honorary coordinator of the CPR Environmental Foundation and as an honorary fellow of the World Aquaculture Society. And he has been in different jobs in the Maldives, but also in India. And so most recently working at CMFRI. His current research is focused on citizen science initiatives to address water quality using satellite remote sensing and marine bio-optics. And this is the topic that he will be talking about today. Grinsen, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Gemma, for the wonderful introduction. So I will just try to share my slides. Hope things are fine.
Perfect.
Thank you. So all these days you were listening to different technical lectures. You have different dreams of doing things. You are looking into different products available from different agencies in different platforms. You are aware of how to acquire such information and use it practically for your own dedicated research. In this lecture, I am trying to give a different perspective of doing research with the support of the society or community, whatever you say. I want to start with a small example, which is based from India, from where I am giving the lecture. I see a lot of Indian participants as well as Bangladeshi participants. When it comes to fulfilling your dreams, one of the main hindrances anyone is going to face is with respect to the financial resources you have. It is not different in research also. But if you can effectively utilize the resources in and around you, you can make wonderful achievements in doing your research. Whatever be the dream, there is a simple example cited. There was a young Air Force officer. He was serving in the Indian Air Force, but he was thinking that whatever he is doing in the Air Force is not benefiting the society in particular. He wanted to do something for the society. His name is Captain Gobinath. He wanted to make the life of people more comfortable. He wanted more people to fly. Then his dream was to start an aviation company without much resources. But when he started presenting his dreams, since he was not from a stable financial background, banks turned down his ambition. He approached many big credit investors also, all of them turned down his idea. But when he explained to the society, people started pouring in with pennies and coins and rupees and whatever it may be. He amazed a lot of money. Things are similar when it comes to crowdfunding. You are familiar with, many of you are familiar with crowdfunding. When there is a dream, someone is posting, people feel that it is part of their dream and they start financially funding such dreams. So if you have a research dream where the society can play a big role, citizen science is the take for you. In this lecture, I am trying to relate water quality and human health with a component of citizen science where their hands are going to support you incredibly to come out with a very good scientific data which can help your studies related to water quality and human health. So let us move forward. When you think of science, what was happening in the time till 20th century, you tell the discovery, you know the person, because most of the discoveries were individual based and self-funded. Of late, things change. Now, even if I tell the discovery, many of you will not be able to recollect who are the people involved in it because things have become multidisciplinary. I will tell always a simple example of a person of Indian origin, Winky. He was instrumental in identifying the structure and function of the ribosome, and his team was awarded Nobel Prize. But other than that, when we tell about the lithium-ion batteries or whatever it may be, we may be knowing one or two persons, but most of the discoveries are not known to our brains because it is multiple people who are involved and the funding comes from government or other funding grants. So because of that, there are a lot of changes. Of late, the recent trend is on citizen science. A lot of scientists are involved in collection and analysis of data relating to the natural world by members of the general public who don't have a typical academic qualification. But these people work as part of a collaborative project with really professional scientists guided by a proper scientific institution. A lot of examples are cited. We have a lot of citizens working in amateur astronomy, citizen oceanography, butterfly counts, ornithology, coral reefs, rocky reefs, even in agriculture. There are instances when farmer-to-farmer networks become more scientific than the research networks. They pass on scientific knowledge through informal networks monitored by a group of scientifically credible personalities. So such things are happening all over the world. Being a citizen also, you can become a scientist. What were the first steps if we look into the history of citizen science? Always the ornithologist ranked number one because they required large number of people observing the birds and giving them the data. So the Audubon team as well as the North American Bird Phenology Program are counted as one of the oldest steps of citizen science in scientifically documenting the migration of the birds. You can see the cards the people were using that time for Christmas bird count, as well as the type of information generated using North American Bird Phenology Program. This information are available in the internet. You can check for such information. So this has resulted in a wonderful data relating to the birds. In today's citizen science, we can have different sets of program, some composing of 3 different components. In some programs, we have all the 3 components. In some programs, you will have only 1 component. Basically, citizen science programs are long-running citizen science program because we have to have time series data sets. So it will be a long-running program. It can be citizen cyber science, where we mostly get involved in volunteer computing, volunteer thinking, passive sensing. Some citizen science program are basically intrinsic to the community science, where do it by yourself science is coming up. Civic sense science is coming up, or civic science is coming up. participatory sensing is coming up. But in some of the programs, you can see all these three components are involved. So citizen science today is long running. It has got a cyber component. It can have a community component. So there are large number of globally relevant citizen science projects. And as I told earlier, it is the ornithologists who are leading most of the very famous citizen science programs. People are interested in knowing about the birds. They want to watch birds. So they are getting a lot of volunteers, some who have inherent interest in doing such things. So most of the world bird count programs are related to citizen science, but there are other programs also. But our interest is related to the environment. I have taken some of the slides from Bob, who is also a panelist today. Basically, when we get involved in the environment, it is very important to nurture a kid's idea on the environment from a young age itself. So when a kid is able to do something with respect to the environment, and if you try to involve them with the environment and related information, they may tend to become pro-environmental friendly individuals. So there are a lot of scientifically documented reports available. Based on the whole body of the research, it is apparent that there is a good link between this behavior. Childhood experiences in nature have a lasting effect on adults. Pro-environmentalism. So this is a very important factor. So we can have such sort of behavior groomed as part of the citizen science program, so that more and more people will become environment friendly. Coming to the science in citizen science related networks, we can see this has been become a talk of the scientific literature in the recent past. From 2002 onwards, we have serious increase in the number of publications with citizen science as a keyword. And you can see there is an upsurge in the last 1 decade. There is a massive increase in the number of publications citing citizen science as a buzzword. So you can see different Web of Science and Scopus and related indices, they have citizen science as a buzzword, and large number of articles are getting published every year. What are the advantages per se when we are utilizing citizens for measuring science? First thing is, like, as a scientist, if I have to go to a remote area just for a count, it is going to cost me a lot. It costs my time, it costs my effort. It requires me to spend some really difficult hours to go to that particular area to count a simple thing. But if a particular group of people are living in that locality and I make them count, I can do that distant measurement without putting much effort. So measurement in distant is possible when we do citizen science. There are a lot of remote areas where there are wonderful scientific or nature related information. So such measurements can be done with the help of citizen science. Citizen science initiatives generally facilitates long time series and extended areas. If a scientist is doing his measurement or his team is doing measurement, sometimes he will do the measurements only when grant in aid is available. He can do the measurements in areas where he can go and do the observation. So that limits the area and that limits the time of measurement. And if we have a global population doing measurements for a scientific goal, we can have global networks which will allow global observations. And in general, citizen science in our experience is less expensive than other in situ samplings. I will say one more sentence, that the full potential for science is yet to be tapped. It's enormous. We can have a lot of data, particularly where there is a lot of population existing in different parts of the world where the data gap is huge. We can utilize these people and get good data and come up with good science which can favor the environment. Coming to our topic of interest, we are interested in marine citizen science. And the equipment which I am dealing in this lecture is Secchi discs. So seawater is analyzed both for its color and transparency, and this small equipment can do wonders, which I will be explaining in the coming lectures. Looking into the history, initially it was a German naturalist, the first Secchi disc record I can say, the German naturalist Adalbert von Chamisso, in Rurik expedition during 1815-1818. He was trying to measure the transparency of seawater, and he thought that it is better to measure using a flat surface. He tried a different way, like using a plumb line painted white with stripes or letters of black or other color. He tried that. Then he could find that white earthen plate or a board covered with white stuff can really make difference. He did some observations during that expedition, and it is recorded also. These observations were mostly he was doing the temperature observations, sea surface and air temperature, which is not related to the disk, but at the same time he used the disk for measuring the transparency of the water in fathoms, measured with this white disk which I was telling. Later, as we moved on, we could see like Sir David Brewster. In 1813, he invented a small floating microscope. His interest was to see the objects underwater. So this is the second step, which we can see the evolutionary progress in the Secchi discs. Then we can see in the history that there was Louis Isidore Duperrey, a French naval officer. He tried to measure the water transparency using a white painted plank. During a different time, he tried to measure like how it is varying in different weather conditions. All those information is there. As noted by himself in his chapter, the first one is his chapter in French, and we have tried to translate it using Google Translator, and you can see like during different weather conditions at different depths, he could see like he could measure the transparency of the water. Later, we have another French writer, Xavier de Maistre. He was using a square iron plate. He was using a square iron plate which was painted white, and he was trying to suspend it horizontally along with a white card so that he can lower it to see how the transparency of the water was affected and what is the type of different colors as the equipment was moving down and down, varying from the transparent waters to the slight sensible green tinge to the darker beautiful green tinges, making somewhere towards the yellow, and that almost the darker shades were seen when the depth was increasing, and finally the equipment was not visible. So this is some of the observations he made during 1832. A missionary bishop in USA, Jackson Kemper, he tried to see like how white towel can be used to measure the clearness of the water. He was using the white towel. As you know, the white towel can better filter out some of the objects which can be up to 6 or 7 fathoms. He tied a white towel in a line and lowered it to see this. Then it was Lieutenant Charles Wilkes from US Navy. During 1838 to 1842, he was using a white painted iron pot to get some information. Further, he tried to use a sphere of hoops where he covered them with white cloth, and he also recorded some of the information which is part of a meteorological table where the data was available for the years 1838, 39, 40, 41 and 42. Captain Auguste Berard, he used a porcelain dinner plate mounted in a fish net during the French Arago expedition in 1845. Samuel Phillips Lee, he used a white painted wood square blocks. So all these were different ways in which people were trying to use or invent their own mechanism to improve the measurement of transparency of the water. But the real man was Pietro Angelo Secchi in 1865. He could publish, indicating that the standard method is by lowering a white painted disc into the water until it disappeared out of the sight. That's how we could measure the transparency. It was clearly explained by Pietro Angelo Secchi in 1865, and it was named as Secchi disc method, as it was standardized by around in the beginning of 20th century that water transparency observations by means of 30 centimeter white disc is the best way to measure the transparency of the water. But there were some counter arguments also in 1901. You can see like the Austrian scientist Joseph Roman Lorenzo van Libranu. He told that there is no point in telling it as Secchi disc by naming in his name. He told that the method can be better called as the disc system, but over a period of time, people started using it as Secchi disc method only. Some of the recent initiatives which are running perfectly with this disc is the study by Dr. Richard Kirby. He's an independent plankton scientist. CIFAS based in United Kingdom, they are having a historic second depth measurements. They are trying to expand this in different parts of the world. Even there are some collaborative ventures happening in India also. City Clubs, a project funded by the European Commission. Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program, CLMP, for around 11,000 inland lakes in Michigan in the United States. The Second Dipin Program, the Lay Monitoring Program on Lake George in New York. These are some of the major Sekidisk initiatives happening in different parts of the world. I am borrowing some of the slides from my mentor, Professor Platt and Dr. Shubha. They together used these slides in different lectures. Color of the water is one thing which has inspired not only the scientists, but poets, artists, geographers, sailors, fishermen, and explorers. The color of water can provide vital information. We are all well aware of it. It can be used for knowing details on fishing also. In the history, whaling captains, notably by William goes by, and he was particularly observant on some of these things. And the color of the ocean, as seen in different ship cruises, indicate the color of the sea with remarkable differences. Airborne sensors were utilized in the initial period during 1923 by Alistair Hardy. He could observe a sharp line separating the green water of the channel from the deep blue of the Atlantic. If the market color changes can be interpreted, he was of the opinion that we can make immediate surveys to come out with the surface condition information so that we can relate them with fisheries. That was his idea, Alistair Hardy's idea. Coming to the classification of the waters using the color, transparency is one thing, but what are the color components which are really doing it? One of the initial records is with respect to Francois Alphonse Forel. He proposed that the color classification standards, his proposition was from the color codes which you can see from 1 to 11, which ranges from around blue to different shades of green. He was making some chemical mixtures in glass tubes to compare the color of the water. So his color codes, we can say it was FU 1 to 11. Later, German Wilhelm Yule, he added 10 more extra levels ranging from blue-green to brown. So now the scale is comprising of 21 color codes, which is going from indigo blue to cola brown. And there are intermediary colors, blue, green, green, and yellow, all together made this FU code. You can see like from this different mixtures which were used, these mixtures, when they were used to produce the real color, people said that the color of the solutions used can be even toxic also. So they wanted to avoid toxic chemicals, but at the same time develop some strips which can be easily used for studying such color of the surface waters. And the FU scales in water quality monitoring started in the real sense when Nuova Ital 2014, they started using the strips for doing this in different mobile applications. We also started using this in a different form in a citizen science program where we had the mini Sekidisk. This is not the typical Sekidisk which is used in marine measurements. It's a different Sekidisk. This has been developed by Tom and Bob. Bob is in the panel again. I told he will be answering some of our queries also. So they developed the mini Sekidisk with the 3D FU color code printed on it. You can see that mini Sekidisk on the screen. And this is the equipment by which they can measure the transparency. They can measure the color of the water. Two things are measured. At the same time, this information has to be coming under the supervision or scientific analysis of some scientists. So we have used this equipment to develop a citizen science network, and the citizen were transferring this data using a mobile application known as Turb Aqua. This mobile application is available in Google Play Store. So you can use this Sekidisk to measure the transparency of the water, to see like what is the FU color code of that particular water body, and transfer the information using this Turb Aqua mobile application. Our 3D printed mini Sekidisk which we used in the application was typically of 20 to 30 centimeter. It is slightly different from the conventional Sekidisk because our mini Sekidisk, which has this 3D printed mini Sekidisk, which was having the FU color code, it can be pocket held. It can be carried to different places easily. So more people can use it, more people can carry it easily. So it is a simple handheld pocket-sized device with the FU color code printed on it. It was developed by Tom and Bob, I told, when they were part of the PML. Tom was working in the education system and Bob was working in PML at that time. And the mobile application was completely developed at ICR Symposium to transmit the data generated using this disk during its operation in Webinar Lake. The entire information is available in Bob's paper on the design of this 3D printed mini Secure disk. And regarding the Turb Aqua application and how we have used the Citizen Science Network, we have used the entire study and published it in another publication, which is also mentioned here. Now coming to the place where we conducted the study, this is for your information. You will be dreaming like how best I can utilize this disk. How can I use a particular mobile application to transfer the data and how can I monitor a lake? So I am coming to the study. We have selected a particular lake, which is called Webinar Lake, where we had in situ measurements also. So as to standardize the studies, what we are carrying out, we had in situ samples from 13 different stations, which are indicated here. This is one of the 3 Ramsar sites in Kerala. It's one of the longest lake systems in India and a lot of rivers drain into this. And it is a critically vulnerable coastal area, which indicates that the community wanted this water body for their livelihood. The people are directly dependent on the different resources in this water body for their regular livelihood and related activities. So you can see these are the different types of activities, the professional activities happening, which is related to the water very much. Tourism is very much prominent in this area. Those who have not visited Kerala, I invite all of you to come to this place and have a beautiful ride on the houseboats. Tourism is very prominent here. We have a lot of coastal aquaculture activities, a lot of farming activities, freshwater aquaculture activities, capture fisheries, and capture fisheries of clams as well as fishes are happening in this lake. So coming to the people who have done the Secure disk measurements, we have invited initially the different colleges which are affiliated to the universities in this place and gave a training so that they will be very much familiar in doing the disk measurements properly. Even though we can say that it is a simple equipment and what we are measuring is simple, there can be a lot of erroneous measurements possible. So we wanted to train them. So we conducted a training program at our institute, which is at Central Marine Fisheries Research, which is located at Cochin. And we gave them a training. We installed the mobile application in their mobile phones, and they started giving us the information through this mobile application to our server. This is the first interaction what we had. You can see the local language, which is Malayalam. And at the same time, we had one in English also. And we did hands-on training on mini Secure disk and Turb Aqua application. The different colleges, I told it was first we targeted the different colleges because students are more enthusiastic and energetic and there is a faculty to monitor them. So our interest was that monitoring is possible through the faculty and the measurements can be possible through the energetic students. So there is a faculty to scientifically monitor the different readings they are taking, and there is help in the form of volunteer help in the form of students who are interested in doing the measurements. You can see all the different colleges in the vicinity of Webinar Lake who were involved in taking measurements from this particular lake, and the lead institutes, NERSI India, NIO Kochi, and the ICR Symposium also can be seen in this picture. The second step was to involve more people. So we wanted to see like if there are people who are interested in monitoring the lake using this 3D printed mini Secure disk. We thought of some NGOs, some lawyer group associations. Our institute is very close to the High Court of Kerala. So some lawyer group associations, they also wanted to take part in this activities. Then there are a lot of houseboat owners. I have indicated that this place is very famous for tourism. There are a lot of houseboats plying in and around the lake. So if the people who are working in the houseboat, they have some leisure time and they can use this disk, we can get plenty of information from the lake. So we organized such a seminar and around 70 participants from different sectors were called. The mayor of Cochin herself, because it's a citizen science initiative, we wanted to involve the leader of the people. So she came to the institute and we had a training program just like the one I explained for the students. It gained a lot of media attention because the lake is having a lot of challenges as such. Pollution is happening in the lake. The people say that the lake is dying. So information on the lake is very crucial, and this network could have been a savior. That was the way the media projected, and we could work to their expectation also, and the citizen scientists all contributed to our effort. We developed a small manual. Our institute is having a repository which is also shown in the link here. You can download the manual which is related to the operation of mini disk and the mobile application Turboqua developed as part of the DST revival project, which is led by Dr. Shubha Satyendra. She is also in the panel. You can see like how we have explained the different steps. The most important thing is on measuring the Secchi depth. This is the information copied with courtesy from the mini Secchi manual version 10 published by PML. So they have clearly indicated how to do the Secchi measurements. The Secchi measurements is done by lowering the white disk into the water and recording the depth at which it disappears. We are slowly lowering the disk, and at a particular depth it disappears. When it is disappearing, we are still not able to judge it properly whether it disappeared at the right spot. So we start slowly hauling it back. Then we know that it is reappearing again. So it is the exact point where it disappears and reappears. So we are able to make a 2-point confirmation. But first it is disappearing, then we are hauling it back, it is suddenly appearing. So it is at that particular point we can tell that it is the Secchi depth. So we have different sets of measurement. Initially, we take the distance from the place we are keeping the handheld device and the surface of the water where the disk touches it. That indicates the distance from the place where we are holding the Secchi disk and where it is touching the surface of the water. That is the first measurement. This is called boat level to water surface. It is how we record it in the mobile application. Then we take the total distance from the device to the depth at which the disk totally disappears. And in the mobile application, we tell this as board level to Secchi disk visible level. This is recorded in meters. Now we have to measure the color of the water body. It is by keeping the disk somewhere around half of the Secchi depth. We know the Secchi depth. It's the surface from the place where it is disappearing. So half of this distance, we are hauling it back and keeping it. And at that place and matching it to the closest number on the color scale. You can see the color scale. The FU color code is imprinted from 1 to 21. So we have the Secchi depth. This depth varies with the changes in the water clarity. If the water is turbid, the clarity is less, the transparency is less. So accordingly, we get different color codes also. So we are using the color codes properly to see what is the Secchi depth. And we are using the color codes to record the color of the water at the half of the Secchi depth. You can see the photos and clearly understand how it is being done. In our Turboqua, it's an interface between the user and the scientist who is sitting at the institute. This can be easily downloaded from the Google Play Store. Now we have come up with the version number 2. I will tell how the version 1 and version 2 was different. We are trying to get some information of the people who are doing it, because when the information is coming and we have to cross-check some of the things regarding the quality of the data, we need to contact them back. So we are trying to get some information registered when they are downloading the app from the Google Play Store. The person who are downloading the app, they have to input their name and mobile number and click a login. A 6-digit OTP number is sent to the person who is registering into their mobile number. They can enter the OTP and click verify. You can see the type of information reaching to us. This information from the mobile application, it is reaching us in this form. There is a serial number, there is a username, there is the board level, the sea level, the water color. Initially, we were thinking of temperature sensors also to attach to the Secchi disk, but unfortunately, since it's becoming costlier in our effort to do it, we avoided the temperature sensor. We get the lat long information. Lat long information automatically gets entered because now in mobile applications, the GPS-based lat long information entry is possible. So we use that facility to get the location information. Once the location is turned on, you will get the lat and long information and the date and time at which this activity is taking place. In addition, we have asked the citizen scientists to take an image of the water body so that the color of the water can be deciphered from the image also. My student ANSI, she is part of this activity, and even the preparation of this slide was largely with her help. So she is analyzing these images using simple machine learning tools so that we can have better quality information using the images also. So we are using these images so as to refine our own scientific activities. This is how the data is appearing in the server. The main brains behind the 3D printed mini circuit disk, I explained it is Tom and Bob. Tom is an industrial design expert and Bob is a marine optics expert. They have their own company, BrevTech. They provide absolutely very good service, and their intention is to improve the environmental awareness, at the same time do a lot of scientific data mining using the data sets available when we work on this equipment. A lot of scientific publications has come out of this. The prototype was presented at a kaleidoscope of color from the turbid to the oligotrophic meeting of the Challenger and Remote Sensing and Photogrammetry Society Marine Optics Special Interest Group, December 2013 in Plymouth. And you can see, like, from 2013 onwards, there is massive increase in the requirement of this mini circuit disk, and we are one of the successful stakeholders of this invention. From mini circuit disk, they are still trying to standardize a lot of things. They are coming into MIDI circuit disk. MIDI is a larger version with the 20-meter tape for use in the coastal ocean, where circuit depths are deeper than 10 meters. Mini is used mostly in inland water bodies like lakes, which are shallower, but MIDI is used in deeper water bodies, which is more than 10 meters. All circuit disks now come with a weight and have provision to add additional weights easily, so that when there are situations when they are drifting so much, the measurement is not possible. So there are additional weight possibilities. Extra weights are provided by BrevTech with the device if requested. Still, the circuit disks are 3D printed. However, the brothers are working on a molded version. For larger batches of the 3D printed version, the price is ranging between 60 to 80 pounds each, pending mini or MIDI. For single pieces, around £90 to 100 each. I think you can be in touch with Bob for getting more information on the commercial aspect of it. This mini circuit disk measurements done in the EU H 2020 project monocly, where a pH paper was attached with a clip on the disk. You can see, like, globally which all places this measurement took place. All said, citizen science is coming with a lot of challenges. There is a lot of problem with the data quality and reliability. People can do it for fun also. When we are engaging people, people do measurements, but that measurements may not be accurate. When we are sometimes doing the measurements in a lake water body, we sometimes get wrong information that the measurement has been done on the land. This is probably because the people are doing the measurement in the water and they are entering the data in the land. So such issues are coming up. In certain parts of India, we have network issues while uploading the data. So that's another problem. We are trying to come up with a better solution. Getting a continued engagement of the citizen science. People may have interest for a certain period of time. Then they may tend to lose the interest. To sustain this effort, we have done this because we had a project. We were continuously motivating the people through different lectures, and she was instrumental in doing the second phase. She was going to the colleges, interacting with the students, motivating them. So this is done because there is a funding. There is a project going on. If there is no funding, how to continuously engage people in getting the information? One way to do is, like, to give them advisories back. If they are reporting some information, we are giving some advisories back to them, telling that the water quality is so much, you can use it for this particular purposes. Like that information is going, sometimes it can improve. But as of now, we don't have such a facility to inform them back about the water quality. Accessibility to the remote locations of the lake. When a person is doing the measurement, he is an amateur, he may not be a professional. So if I am asking him to measure from the lake waters, he may stand on the bank of on the land part of the terrestrial part of the lake and try to do some measurements where the water is available. But really the information pertaining to the deeper parts of the lake will not be available. But if you are definitely utilizing the houseboat operators or some ferries which are being operational in the lake, we can get better data. Limited number of mini circuit disks. We don't have these disks in large numbers. People may be interested in taking them when it is available for free, but when it is priced, people may not be motivated also. So it requires a lot of motivation for participation. So these are some of the challenges what we face during our citizen science activity. Now coming to, I told about the quality of the images. We have witnessed a lot of issues with respect to the different images we have received in this citizen science, that I told that ANSI is trying to work on the different images obtained and apply some machine learning techniques to get better information on the quality of the water from the lake. We have shadows sometimes. We have edited or cropped images also. Sun glint is seen. Lake bottom visibility is having some reflections, unwanted substances, ripples. Images really not covering the water body because the water bodies are really not good. That's why we are monitoring them. Sometimes there can be massive presence of aquatic weeds. Sometimes land area is seen along with the water body. Floating vegetation and debris is a common problem in many of these lakes, and these are some of the problems what we are facing when we are capturing the images. We have come up with an improvised version, Tarbaqua version 2, where one problem is like we are measuring color, but we are not really authenticating that the person who is measuring is having a color vision. So we have included color vision test. First time when you are registering, you have to undergo this test and register yourself so that we know that your color vision is perfect. Then we have come up with some slight modification. We wanted to really know like what was the environmental condition during that time, whether it was raining or whether wind was there, whether the bottom was visible, whether you are really trained. We have done series of trainings. Ansi and Nanda Kishore, probably he is also attending this lecture. They have been part of this scientific team and they were independently doing awareness among the college students to involve many of them in these activities. So we have been doing a lot of trainings to get them into the system and do a proper measurements at the same time keeping them motivated. In our turbidity calculator also, we have added a mechanism in which we can improve the location specifics. You can zoom into the proper location. Sometimes the locations are going wrong, so we wanted to zoom into the location specifics also. Sometimes when they are taking image, just because they are not rightly taking the image, it results in a lot of distorted images. So we have come up with a mechanism in which if the image is proper, there will be a green circle with a pointed center, which clearly indicates that the font requires adjustments till the green circle is coming up with the white dot to capture the image. Ansi has come up with some more additional features so that her interest is also served. She is more interested in images. So she thought like even if sticky disks are not available, people can use this application just to send the images and color code. So she has developed a color code into the mobile application where she has given all the color codes so that we can select the right color code for the water body and then send the information of the images and the water body using this application. But still we are yet to enable this particular feature alone because as a scientist, we are interested in the transparency measurements also. So we have not enabled the color code plus image alone option. But ANSI told it will be very useful if we get more images with the proper color code information. These are some of the outreach programs ANSI and Nanda Kishore took got involved in different colleges and they were doing the brainstorming in all these colleges. Really what we gained in the study. As a scientist, we could do measurements only at 13 stations. I was indicating that. The red spots in the first figure indicates the 13 stations from which we have got information. But you see the crowd of information what was generated by the citizen scientists. Even they went to the tributaries of the lake. You may see some yellow spots. You may think that it is land area. Initially, we were also thinking like it may be land area when we plotted. But when we closely looked into them, there were some tributaries of this lake. So we got a lot of information from different parts of this water body. So you can imagine the plethora of information we got only because citizens were involved. And you can see the increase in frequency of observation in certain location, particularly close to the city area of Cochin, where the lake is opening to the seawater. There are a lot of academic institutions related to fisheries, oceanography, and related sciences, and massive frequent observations are happening in the bar mouth area. Finally, the spatial based plots based on lake utilization could be created. So you can imagine like without this color codes and the information, we could not create this. And this is having a lot of relevance. Like when it comes to an industrial area, the color is different. When it comes to a fishing area, the color is different. When the boat operations are done in those areas, the transparency is more. So we could see like different activities can have different links to some of the information what we have generated. These are the most frequent colors we observed in the lake area, which range from 11 to 21 mostly. These are the different colors which we have witnessed in the lake. We could see like when we are getting time series information, what happened to the lake in 2019 based on the color, what happened to the lake in 2020 and what happened to the lake in 2021. We could see like how the Vembanad lake was behaving, but mostly it consists of greenish brown to brownish green waters. 88% of the images clearly indicate that it is greenish brown to brownish green color. So the fluvial color typically ranges from 14 to 17 in our FU scale. So with this equipment, the mobile application, we have developed some water quality related products, and this has got additional implications with the spectral information. In general, in most of your training up to this time, you must have seen something which is coming from the Earth observation satellites. You have seen some information coming from the in situ observations, in situ sensors. Sensors or in situ observations are giving you some data sets. Satellite Earth observations are giving you some data sets. But still there is something missing. A lot of things are missing. These missing areas can easily be bridged, where the research gap between satellite monitoring and in situ sampling can be patched up for real-time assessment of water bodies. That is exactly what we did. And coming to the biooptics, like some of this information has already been discussed, so I am skipping this fast. You are familiar with IOCCG. IOCCG reports clearly indicates definitions on what are the different terms used in biooptics. You can go through them and how we can use the spectral information for inorganic suspended matter, dissolved organic matter, and phytoplankton, which has got big role in biooptics. So similar to the biooptical information generated, we can have complexity in the case two orders where phytoplankton, yellow substances, suspended material, they come in different combinations. When we studied Vembanad Lake also, we could see like the water color is different and accordingly the spectra also changes. But in general, there is the contribution of the detrital matter, what is contributing to the reflectance pattern of the Vembanad Lake. The detritus matter, AD, the absorption at the, with the detritus is the dominant component contributing to the absorption. The brown color in the diagram shows the dominance of the detritus matter. So remote sensing reflectance is very high in sediments in the Vembanad Lake. So these are some of the major results what we achieved during our study. We could see the variation in seasons, but at the same time, what is the relative contribution of the different optical constituents of water was also generated in the study using in situ sampling, and we could improve some of the existing relationship. There was a Cosim et al. In 1968, they have come up with a relationship between the mean attenuation coefficient and 1 by d in Cochin backwaters. So his relation was 1.5 by d, and we could improve the relation 0.7 by d, which indicates that the lake is getting deteriorated much over a period of time. That's why it's 0.7 by d. The transparency in the water is not so good. There is a lot of change what has happened in the lake over a period of 55 years. A significant inverse relation was noted in the case of turbidity against Seki depth. Coming to the real component on the indicators of the UN Water 2021, where people are having unsafe water. A lot of people are not having access to proper drinking water. The number is huge. The data statistics indicate that there is serious effort which is needed in this area to have safe drinking water for the people. And this results in a lot of water associated diseases, and the Sustainable Development Goal number 6, which is for clean water and sanitation, is a distant dream. You can see the situation in India and the situation in the globe also. In India as well as in, because I am from India, I have this statistics, and most of these things have been discussed repeatedly. So water associated diseases are on rise. And if the color of the water with the transparency of the water can give some good information, which can be related to these indicators, it can come up with some wonderful scientific discoveries which can be path breaking. So our first strategy was as part of the revival program, which has been discussed before earlier in the lectures of Dr. Gemma as well as Dr. Shubha, where we were trying to monitor the lake and come up with some advisories which can be related to the water associated diseases. Particularly, we were trying to address Vibrio, cholera, and trying to develop an epidemiological model. So we were trying to use this information in which the user engagement, which I was discussing earlier, was part of it. Now we are trying to improve upon it. We are trying to see like how better we can do about these things. We have another project, waterborne infectious diseases and global earth observation in the near shore. The project is named Vigion. Here we are trying to create much more better databases, and we are trying to promote citizen science using another mobile application to collect real-time information on sanitary conditions. How good are the sanitary conditions in the places? So we have identified some areas, and we are trying to see like how best we can identify and characterize the health conditions of some of the most known recreational beaches in this part of the world. I told this is a tourist destination. Also, we have a lot of beautiful beaches. So we are trying to see like how best we can tell about the health conditions of these things. We are trying to combine this with some information which we have gathered from the citizen. So for that purpose, we have developed a mobile application called Cleanse. This is a smartphone application developed by our team, where Nansen Environmental Research Center India and the National Institute of Oceanography were the leading partners. We developed this application for sanitation surveying. In our part of the world, the population density is very high. So people live very close by. The different houses will be separated by a very small distance. And sometimes the drinking water sources and the septic tank can be very close by because the area available for habitation is very less. So this can result in some of the possible contaminations for drinking water sources. In addition, we are trying to combine disease database with earth observation and model data to develop better early warning systems on diseases outbreak which are happening in this area using machine learning approaches. Color is very important. So ocean color also is an important area where we can do many things, and it can socially benefit a lot of things. So these are some of the major activities which are very much related to the citizen science measurements what we are undertaking. You can see the mobile application Cleanse which is being done. This application has been developed to collect information, as I was telling. So we get all this information like the GPS location and how the people are answering to it and what all information are coming to it. So based on that, we give this information in a bilingual mode so that people can answer the questions easily, so that citizens can participate. We have generated a lot of information based on ESA Vigian project, and the preliminary observations clearly indicate that 73% of households have not done any kind of water quality tests and believe that the drinking water that they get is totally uncontaminated, which is not the truth. And most of the households have septic tanks, most of them. But the problems faced by the community is that when there is flooding happening during seawater intrusions during southwest monsoon time and extreme rainfall conditions, there is a possibility of mixing of septic tank water with the drinking water sources also. Even the typical issues on hygiene were also discussed in the questionnaire, and we could see that many of the hygienic protocols are failing in this part of the world. We have issues of waterborne illness happening because the hygiene situations are not good. We have contamination of the water bodies happening because of the contamination happening between the septic tanks as well as the drinking water sources, and it results in diseases such as cholera, diarrhea, typhoid, amoebiasis, hepatitis, gastroenteritis, giardiasis, and many number of other enteric and related worm infections also. A integrated disease surveillance program is there by the government of India. It's a decentralized state-based surveillance system for a range of diseases that are of public importance. We get some data from private practitioners also. Some of the syndromic surveillance, specifically non-specific health indicators, including signs, symptoms. For example, people may complain that they can have dysentery, But if we know that there is an epidemic in the form of cholera, then it can be related to cholera also. Such mostly syndromic surveillance also is taking place, and government sometimes reports only cases which are diagnosed only in public hospitals or confirmed by the government recognized laboratories. Otherwise, the data seems very scarce. Basically, in general, we have issues because of contamination of water sources, poor sanitation and hygiene practices, lack of access to safe drinking water, and climate change and related disasters. When there are storm surges happening because of cyclones and other things, it can also contaminate the drinking water sources. We have issues of pollution also. And when the pollution is happening, it can result in poor microbial quality. And finally, when there is poor microbial quality, there can be increase in the frequency of the diseases, what is happening, which can be related to climate change because there are floods, droughts, cyclones, receding coastlines, and increase in waterborne diseases, what is happening over a period of time. So I want to show like citizen science data can show wonderful results. This was one court order which made the civilians to demolish some of the flats which was located along the banks of Vembanad Lake. But so as to study the impact of this demolition on the lake water, we could use the citizen science data. And the panelist, Dr. Nandini Menon, she could publish citizen science tools reveal changes in estuarine water quality following demolition of buildings. So now one of the important data sets available from the vicinity was this citizen science data. And my paper on citizen science contribute to real-time monitoring of lake water quality using 3D printed mini CK disk is indicating how best we can develop a network of system where we can get such information. And we have worked on all this water quality related indices and the distribution of fecal contamination, which was by Anas et al. And the designing in sensors by Bob and his team, and how intrinsically this water quality can be related to whether it is the color of the water or other optical constituents. Is there a possibility to study the changes what is happening in the optical constituent to relate it with the environmental reservoirs of Vibrio? Marie Fanier recall they have she has tried to review on the different aspects and come up with some solutions. We got an opportunity in 2020 because of COVID. The anthropogenic disturbances were less, so the effect of reduced anthropogenic activities on water quality in Lake Vembanad was done by Gemma. She's also a panelist. She was introducing me. And further, Anas again came to the dynamics of the Vibrio cholera in this lake system, where he tried to relate it with the remote sensing and risk mapping. So it's not a single effort from my institute side. I got tremendous support from my director, Dr. A. Gopalakrishnan, Dr. Somi Kuriakos, Dr. Mini. And as I told, in the long way we ran, Professor Dr. Trevor Platt, he was instrumental in conceiving most of these ideas. We were just foot soldiers, and he empowered us in doing such things. It is not my brainchild or not my intellectual thinking. It was his vision. He wanted to do something for the society. I happened to be one of the person who was sitting in his vicinity who could pick up some of these ideas and do with his support. And Professor Dr. Shubha Satyendranath, she was also equally contributing and motivating us in doing things. When we were falling, she was trying to support us. When we were moving away, she was trying to bring our focus back into things. And I got a lot of support from Dr. Nandini Menon. Even in this presentation also, it's not my brains which has really gone into it. She has put a lot of efforts in refining it along with our team members. Shubha ma'am also did a good job in doing this. Anas was doing the microbiology part, and I was absent as it was indicated. I was on deputation. So Dr. Somi and Dr. Mini was taking care of the activities, and Bob was the man behind the equipment. I think in the panel discussion, we can hear a lot from him. And most of my activities were not restricted to the one funding agency. We have developed things with the support of different funding agencies, which have been acknowledged here. I know that there are a lot of questions coming in. I saw some of the questions being shown here. I will stop here because it's typically 1 hour time which was given to me. Let us have a free and fair discussion. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks, Tom and others, and all the panelists who are sitting here. Thanks, European Space Agency. I know Stefano is also is joining as part of the panel, and his support financially in grant in aid also was very useful in taking these activities forward. Thanks for the opportunity. Let us discuss much further.
Thank you, Grinson, for this wonderful presentation. We have questions, and there might be more questions coming in. I just want to note that Nandini put all of the links to the publications that Grinson showed at the end of his presentation in the chat, so you can access those presentations, hopefully online. I think most of them are open access, so you can read about his work as well. I think I'll start with the practical questions. There was a question on whether participants are going to get a certificate. I think they are, but maybe TJ, you can confirm.
Yeah, so that's we're logging who's attended the lectures. So at the end of the series, we basically have a criteria that you have to have attended a certain number of lectures, and then we will email out certificates of attendance. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, TJ, for confirming. So Grinson, I'm just going to walk through the questions, and I think we'll follow the order of your presentation a little bit. I think you are happy for everyone else to pitch in as well. So there are questions related to the Secchi disc and the mini Secchi discs that you have mentioned. There was one comment, not specifically a question, but I think a participant from Italy, wanted to highlight that the Angelo Secchi, who designed the Secchi disc, was actually from Italy. So I just wanted to mention that because it seemed important. And so the first quick question is related to the sampling and how different people take samples. So there is some uncertainty in how people perceive maybe color or the disc disappearing. So how do you deal with that? Do you correct for that? Do you check the data in any way that's collected by citizen science?
Yeah, Bob has raised his hand, so.
Oh, Bob, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a great question, and a question that often actually people ask when they think about this, especially seeing that everyone sees differently. We have a different set of eyes and everything. We've looked into this question ourselves, but others have as well. One thing we did in that initial paper that Grinson mentioned in 2019 is we actually filled up a dustbin full of water, and then we added a little bit of food colouring into that to modify the clarity of the water. And then we got loads of people to come along and test the Secchi depths. We did it in a school, actually, and then we also did it at that very first conference, if some of you recall, back in 2013 at PML. And we found on average that the Secchi disc measurement, there was about a 7% error between amongst individuals. So that's a percentage deviation of around 7%. We have actually also tested it in the field as well. So actually recently we did a little bit of work on the Atlantic Meridional Transect cruise, which is one of these cruises that goes down the center of the Atlantic and samples a whole range of waters from reasonably turbid through to very, very clear. We again getting many different individuals to test it, and that percentage deviation increased to around 10% in the field. But I think it'll depend often where you are in terms of the Secchi disc. So if you're measuring in lakes where the Secchi depths are quite shallow, I think that percentage error is a little bit lower. If you're out in the middle of the Atlantic Gyre, like we were on the AMT, and the Secchi depths are 50 meters, then that can be a little bit higher. So that's hopefully that answers the questions on the Secchi depth. Now, in terms of the colour, there's also an uncertainty in that. And actually, there was a very nice paper published recently by, I think, a PhD student, looking at the effect of colour blindness actually on the Ferrel-Uhl colour measurements. And yes, again, there is an uncertainty around the fact that we all see colour slightly differently. Our initial tests on that, again on the AMT, we typically see an average difference of around 1 on the frontal color scale. So normally, if you're 15, then you'll get measurements typically between about 14 and 16. Occasionally you get one person with quite a wild difference, but normally it's around 1 on the frontal unit. And I've heard that as well from other people doing other experiments.
And thank you, Bob. TJ, do you have something to add?
I was just going to add also, I think, Bob, it might also be worth mentioning, I know you've looked into this, I think there's different approaches for use of citizen data compared to, say, highly technical instrument data. So the idea is, rather than having one super precise measurement, you have thousands of imprecise measurements, but you get the bulk property from those imprecise measurements. So there's also a higher level of uncertainty allowed when we're using citizen science data. We just use slightly more robust analytical metrics.
Yeah, Tom, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, that's the one advantage with low cost technologies like this, is you can get many more data points, can you, than the expensive commercial kit. I think we need to be slightly careful with what we mean by uncertainty, of course, because we could partition that into sort of a random error and a systematic one. And it's the systematic one we need to be a little bit careful with, I think, when we're dealing with citizen observations. But you're right, the random error we can tackle by just having a lot more measurements.
Thank you, TJ. Shuba, I saw that you were holding a mini Secchi disc there. So there were some questions, actually. I think lots of people got excited about where can we get a mini Secchi disc? Can we buy them? Are they for free? Can we purchase them in the UK as well as in India? So if anyone wants to comment on that, please go ahead.
I'm happy to jump in first, if that's all right. Firstly, I think the thing to note with this mini Secchi disc, I mean, it develops on a piece of technology that's 150 years old, right? I mean, there's nothing new with this. So our approach to the mini Secchi disc was to make everything freely and openly available. So you can even on the paper we published back in 2019, you can download all the STL files, and there's sort of rough instructions on how to build your own if you want. I wouldn't recommend doing that. I actually recommend going on to the website Brewtech Online, and we provide the latest versions of those files on that website. I'm just going to stick it in the chat now. Excuse me. So you can build them yourself. They aren't quite as easy to build as we hope at this stage, but you have that option. The other thing you can do is you can buy small kits as well. So some of the components, like the tape and the disc and the weight, are kind of specialized, though you can build them with those files yourself. And so you could buy the kits and then just print the 3D parts you want. But also you can buy them in one, so to speak. Now at the moment they're all 3D printed, and it does take a little bit of care and attention to build them, and a bit of time to build them. So they're slightly more expensive than we had hoped initially. They're around sort of between about £90 and £100 each individually at the moment, but we can scale that down a little bit if you wanted a bulk order. However, we're on the verge now, very close to producing an injection molded version. We're actually in discussions with the company doing that. And once we've produced an injection molded version, then we can produce them much more cheaply. But yeah, if you're interested in one or want to learn anything about, go onto that website there. Also, I think Nandini put our email, the Brewtech email in, if you have any inquiries or interested in getting one.
I have given the mail ID, contact ID.
Yeah. Thank you, Bob. Shuba, do you want to say something? I think you're muted.
Sorry, I was muted, and I want to say something. There was a question about the operation. Perhaps it was not quite clear that there are two components to this Secchi disc. This is the part that goes down in the water, and it is completely white. The part that remains in your hand is the one that has the color imprinted on it. The Secchi disk itself is white. This remains in your hand above the water, and you compare the color that you see on the white disk when it is underwater with the color scale you have in your hand. So the color of the disk is not multicolored, it's white. I think there was a related question about whether the standard
Yes.
disk can be compared with the little disk, the mini disk. Maybe that's also for you, Bob.
Yeah, sure. So it's a good question. There's again, I mean, I'm tapping in here now. There's a lot of literature on the theory behind the Secchi disk measurements and on some of these questions that were popping up. So I strongly recommend those interested looking into it. And some of this literature dates back to the 1960s and 70s and earlier, actually. But on the disk size front, one of the things we did with the mini Secchi disk, as Grinson touched on in his presentation, was we reduced the size of the disk a little bit. And our justification for that is that the mini Secchi disks were being used in relatively turbid waters, where you're getting Secchi depths in the region of 1 to 5 meters max, I think. Whereas, of course, if you go out into the open ocean and do the measurements, your Secchi depths are a lot larger, and so the object you're actually looking at looks a lot smaller at that depth. So in a way, the object you're seeing, the size of it changes depending on the Secchi depth. Now, there has been work that's looked at the effect of disk size on the Secchi depth, and a lot of that work suggests that if you increase the disk size, your Secchi depths go a little bit deeper, though again there has been some recent work that is challenging that assumption as well. So there's a lot of interesting things happening. On the theory side, I spotted a question popping up as well on how does the Secchi disk depth relate to the optical properties of the water? And again, this is something that's there's sort of been a recent surge in understanding exactly that theory. But traditionally, a lot of the theory goes back to a chap called Rudolf Presendorfer, and I might be mispronouncing his surname slightly, but he was a big optics guy back in the sort of 70s and 80s. And he wrote quite detailed theory on the Secchi disk. Now, if you account for your take into consideration the fact the eye-brain kind of system, if you can account for effects related to the water surface itself, you can, in his theory, you can directly relate the Secchi depth to the sum of the beam attenuation coefficient and the diffuse attenuation coefficient. And this is in photopic units, so to speak, because our eyes see the light slightly differently depending on the wavelength. However, that theory has been recently challenged by Zongping Li, who wrote a paper back in 2015. And what he had found is that actually, because the beam attenuation coefficient is often a much bigger number than the diffuse attenuation coefficient, the traditional theory suggests that it's the beam attenuation coefficient that is the primary sort of covariate with the Secchi depth. However, Zongping Li had observed that the diffuse attenuation coefficient often correlates very tightly with the Secchi depth, as Grinson was showing in some of his plots in his presentation. And he proposed a new theory which more directly relates the Secchi depth to the diffuse attenuation coefficient rather than the beam attenuation coefficient. But there's still some sort of nice communications going on within our community as to which of these theories hold.
Thank you, Bob, for picking up on that question as well. There's one more question about the design of the mini Secchi disk and whether you've thought about doing a black and white disk. as this is more commonly used in inland waters?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. And again, this is something that a lot of people have looked at. I mean, my understanding of the black and the white disc was the black part of the disc was, in a way, it enhanced the contrast between the black and the white part. So you should be able to see the disc a little bit more easily. And the person who posed the question was right that often white discs are used in the open ocean, whereas people sometimes use these black and white discs in the lakes and freshwater systems. I'm not convinced whether one's better than the other, to be honest. In my experience, I haven't seen a lot of difference. I mean, your Secchi depth will change depending on these contrast factors, on how bright the disc is, and that's an important component of the Secchi depth theory. Going back to Presendorfer's work, we considered it for one, but because our disc is quite small, only 10 centimeters, if you paint half of it black, you can only really see the other half of the surface area. So we ended up sticking with just pure white. One thing I will add, actually, we are in the process of developing a new version here, and we've started to integrate some sensors into it as well. So this is very hot off the press at the moment, but we're looking at integrating environmental sensor packages into the disc now, so we can measure spectral light and temperature as well as pressure.
Thank you, Bob.
But very early days.
Yes, I think many of us are looking forward to that one. We move on to some questions about citizen science. And Grinson, I'm hoping that you could answer this one. You've mentioned that you've worked with local colleges in Lake Fembonant as students. And so the question is whether you feel that education is an integral part of citizen science initiatives, and how much of a multiplier it can be for the uptake of engagement.
I will say that we have not really done an impact study that way, but in general, when we selected the college students, our idea was like they will have some train information on what they are going to do. So when we selected the college students, we have gone to the different colleges and seen like who are going to be the best people who can support us. So we have taken students from environmental science background and those who are doing zoology and related fields, where they already have experience with the normal Secchi disc. So it was easier to train them. And there is a scientific coordinator who is related to some of these studies. So that's how we selected the initial team. And in the second part, we have involved more citizens, the people who are not having so much of educational background. But the advantage with the team who is having a formal education is like, since they were having a faculty coordinator, they were doing more observations and more measurements on a regular basis. But when it came to the other citizen scientists who were doing a profession and who were associated with us, the number of observations was significantly much less. Some people have taken the disc, they have not even given the observation also. And when we are asking them, where is the disc? We get an answer, oh, I don't remember, I came for the training, but then I did not find time. Such answers are coming from such people. So we find that getting a citizen science program done by a team of people who are already in formal education is much easier. But we are yet to do a significant impact study. But this is a good question. I will try to do a significant study based on this also, so that we can come up with some good results which can be scientifically peer reviewed and can be brought for the knowledge of people who are planning to do such things. That's a good question. Thank you.
Thank you for your answer. Nandini, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I would like to add something. The main problem with citizen science is sustaining the interest of the citizen scientists, because the interest tends to wane off after a particular time, whether it is college students or other stakeholders or whoever it is. Initially, they take readings, and the number of readings come down as you as the time progresses, and that's the problem. So now Grinson is trying a new way, that is, he is encouraging the students to take it up as a project for their UG or PG curriculum. So in that way, at least he'll get some more readings, and also encourage them to take other water quality parameters also using the instruments from their colleges, so that they are also benefited, we also get the data.
Thank you, Nandini. Shubha, do you want to add something? You're muted.
Yeah, I wanted to add something, and that is in the sanitation app, not the cleanse app, we are thinking more about giving something back to the citizens for their contribution to the data. So in the sanitation app cleanse, they get the entire map as their reward for, shall we say reward, for being in the citizen science group. Perhaps we could do the same for the Turb Aqua app. That is, every time they upload an image, they get the image of the whole, the whole lake back. So that will perhaps keep their interest. You give one observation and you get 100 back. So they can see how the whole lake is looking, and maybe that will keep them more interested in the longer term. Just a thought that occurred to me when listening to Nandini speak.
Thank you, Shubha and Nandini. That answers actually a question about engagement and how you continue engagement of citizen scientists. So another question is about the data that's generated by citizen scientists. And we already talked a little bit about the error in that, the uncertainty in that, but there was also a question on whether citizen science data is actually accepted by the broader scientific community as good quality data. Does the scientific community take up the data as well?
We have, yes, Bob, carry on.
Please, after you, Grinson.
Yes, we have publications as a proof. So high impact journals already published some of the articles which we have submitted. And in general, when we are taking the citizen science data, we also go with a caution. So we want to see like how best we can filter out the data which is not up to the quality. So we have developed some mechanisms by which we can do it. Further, in order to refine this in the Turb Aqua application, we have a possibility of uploading the images of the water body. So if we get good quality images also, we can compare like what can be the color of that particular water body using the machine learning techniques also. So we can remove the subjectivity associated with the human error, what can happen when a person is estimating the color of the water body. So that is a possibility. So how best we can improve it and include or incorporate it into the mobile application can improve the quality of the data also. So we are working on it much further. Okay, Bob, you can tell.
No, I think you covered most of what I was going to say. I mean, the only point which I think you touched on a little bit was it's important to compare these low-cost methods with sort of commercially available, community-accepted technology where possible. So into comparison exercises, we found you can, for example, getting involved in research cruises can be useful. So on the AMT transects I mentioned earlier, I put a link actually into a paper we recently published on that. They had these £20,000 hyperspectral radiometers on the ship. They were doing profiling of optical properties. And of course, we could then get out and do our cheap Secchi measurements and then do a sort of thorough comparison of the quality of the Secchi observation in comparison to those standard technology.
Thank you, Grinson and Bob, for those answers. There's another question about the data and whether the data from the mini disk is freely available to everyone and where participants or trainees might be able to access that.
Not made it openly available for the people, but we have a registered citizen science group network. I told there are academic coordinators who are supporting this, and they are the people who are really interested in this. So whoever they are asking the data, and for their particular locations, we are giving the data. But as such, some of the data sets which we have generated, we have published also in the open access journals where they can access it. But we are getting a flood of information. But we will be also using some WebGIS sort of platforms to improve the accessibility of the data. People can easily retrieve those information. As Shubha ma'am told, we have to have a lot of homeworks to do so that people can get an advisory of the entire lake. If a person is interested in houseboat operation, he may be interested in the transparency. People will be interested in seeing a clearer lake than a turbid lake. So which part of the lake is clear? They can go for tourism and related activities there. When there is a fishing activity, they want to see like the turbidity is not going to affect the fishes, so we can give the turbidity measurements for the fish farmers. So like that specific advisory services can be possible, but it may require a lot of funds also. We are looking for funds, and if more funds are coming, we can have some projects on these areas and give them better information and make it more operational.
Thank you, Grinson. I want to follow up on you mentioning that you publish scientific papers. There's a question on whether you could tell us more if the citizen science projects have also led into change into governance or in policy surrounding Lake Vembanot. You also mentioned there was a lot of media attention on that. So I think the question is whether it's picked up more broadly than just in science.
I would say the project Revival has really created a lot of awareness of public, awareness on the lake ecosystem towards the public. Recently also when Dr. Shubha was here, there was a lot of media attention on some of the peer-reviewed publications which we have published. And based on that, the media themselves came up with some of the open forum discussions. I think Dr. Nandini, with her photograph, appeared in one of the leading dailies in Kerala, where they were discussing on how best, now we have information. And Dr. Nandini telling that the lake is polluted is not the final thing. We have to have some solutions for that. So now we get some data which can be part of the monitoring and surveillance program. But we have to come up with solutions. So what are the solutions possible for the lake? So such practical approaches have to be facilitated, which is part of the governance also. That's why we have involved even the mayor of the Cochin city, who has got a major stake on the Vembanad Lake when we did our citizen science program. Then we are in touch with some of the people. Even when the floods came up, Nandini, myself and Anas, we were with the finance minister of Kerala in his constituency, which is in the upper Kuttanadan stretches where the flood is creating a major problem. I think with the GEMA's technology on mapping the flood risks also, there will be much better requirement of ours in these areas. So in this project, we were not only seeing the color of the lake, we were looking into the different intricate aspects of the health of the water in terms of its microbial quality. We were looking into how best we can decipher the flooding places and non-flooding locations to rule out some locations are not getting flooded, some locations are getting frequently flooded. And if we can give some early warning systems on the outbreaks of water-associated diseases to the community. Here, the community structure is very intricate and the density is very high. So if something can happen, it can create problem for a lot of people. Our own literature survey clearly indicated that people are losing a lot of working days, which turns up into a lot of money also when they are losing their working days because of acute diarrheal diseases. So there are a lot of implications in the society. And in my presentation, I told this particular lake is a critically vulnerable coastal area. People are really directly dependent on the water body for their daily livelihood. So if there is a problem with the water quality, their livelihood is affected. So that way, this is a very important thing, and a lot of discussions are going on. From the problems or challenges we have witnessed when we are doing the programs, we are trying to come up with solutions also. That's why we term it as a revival, how best we can come back or restore the lake water quality. We do awareness programs also, some small awareness programs also we conducted, and the revival program stopped long back. Now we are getting continuous funding from other agencies, particularly European Space Agency is funding some of our activities. We are trying to mobilize our own institutional funding mechanism to augment our own plans and continuously work on this activity. It is not stopping. So this was an initiation, and it is still continuing, maybe in different forms. And I feel like Lake Vembanad will be better off in the years to come, with the governance into play, science into play, and the people interested in it.
Thank you, Grinson. That is a wonderful answer. There are a couple of questions left. So one is about the Forel-Uhle scale. This scale has 21 colors, but there's a question about comparison with remote sensing, and that usually there are 13 different optical water types. So what is the difference between optical water types and the Forel-Uhle scale? And why are there 21 versus less 13? So maybe TJ can answer, or maybe Grinson can answer.
I can start if you want. You may have seen in some of the previous talks discussions of optical water types. I will cover them a little bit later in my lecture 9, but those water types were designed to cover most of the global oceans, not so much to cover coastal waters. So if you really look into the literature into kind of the growth of the use of optical water types over the last few years, there are different water type sets for use in coastal waters or lakes compared to the global oceans. But fundamentally, the water types there are defined based on the reflectances at multiple wavelengths. So it's a spectral property. Whereas the Forel-Uhle scale is looking at basically the hue of the water, which is a single value varying across the kind of continuous hue scale. So you could imagine you might also have optical water types where the satellite sensor that you're using has a different sensitivity to the human eye. So in the near infrared or in the red band, for example, in the visible. So that's why there will always be, I think, a difference between how we identify waters through satellite remote sensing and through something like the Forel-Uhle, which is designed to work with really human perception and hues of color. Yeah, it's not to say that either is wrong, they're just used in different ways. And I think we will find as satellite capabilities improve and we move into more hyperspectral sensors, the number of optical water types we use to distinguish from open ocean to coastal waters will probably increase and probably approach 20 or more. So Shuba's got an input too.
Shuba, do you want to add something? You're muted again.
I should stop muting myself. Forget that I did this. Sorry. I think we also have to remember that the two instruments, say a satellite radiometer and the Secchi disk, they are not measuring the same optical properties. The Secchi disk measurements fall into the category of photometric. Satellite observations are radiometric measurements. And what is the principal difference between them is that in a radiometric instrument, the sensing device is some kind of a sensor that captures the flux of light in different wavelengths. So it is a flux measurement. In a photometric measurement, the detecting instrument is your eye, not a radiometer, and the eye does not respond equally to all the different wavelengths. So the eye is designed to detect, shall we say, color and intensity. So they are measuring different things. That is why it is somewhat difficult to convert from a photometric measurement to a radiometric measurement and compare the two. And that's what Bob was also talking about earlier. Some very clever people over the years have tried to make that connection, and it's a complex problem. But if you are really interested, there are a lot of material in the open literature about it.
Thank you, Shubha. I have two more general questions about data and Earth observation. So there was a question about comparing satellite data with in situ measurements, and whether the mean of multiple in situ measurements should be taken to compare at the same spatial resolution as the satellite, or whether another approach should be followed. Not sure if anyone wants to answer this.
Bob, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think if I read the question, I recall the question as well. The more measurements you collect in situ, the more confidence one has in that measurement. So, you know, if you've got a mini Secchi disc or another Secchi disc, and it's always good to collect as much data as possible. Now, in the context of when you match it up with the satellite observations, we then get into some difficulties because the spatial scales of the two observations are often vastly different, right? And it also then depends on how stable or homogeneous the location that you're sampling is, how representative it is of space. So if you're in a really dynamic region, like we've actually been doing some Secchi disc measurements in an estuary down here in Cornwall, and we saw big changes in Secchi depth with the tidal cycles, right? Which was quite interesting to see. So in that case, if we were matching to our satellite observations, we want to be very close in time and very close in space. But, you know, if you go out again, I'm going to go on about the center of the Atlantic gyre, where we have these extremely blue, stable waters. Typically, the spatial and temporal scales in which we match to our satellite observations, we can potentially relax a little bit. I'll pass back to you, Shubha.
Sorry, I lost my thread there. What was the question again?
It was about comparison of in situ and satellite data, and I think Bob covered it.
I think Bob covered it. Yeah,
and we've also talked about it in previous
lectures. Okay, it's coming back to me.
Course.
I was going to refer whoever asked back to the presentation by Son. It was the 4th lecture. He had given many examples and associated references where the Secchi disc measurements were compared with satellite observations and then eventually used to create maps of Secchi disc, or Secchi depth, sorry. So the Son's talk is now on the YouTube. So you could go to that talk, listen to those parts again, or see it for the first time if you missed it, and then follow up by reading the publications referenced in the talk.
Thank you, Shubha. There's a sort of open question here, is whether the field of ocean color should still be called ocean color if we are interested in inland waters, and if we are increasingly interested in aquatic sensing of what is termed non-observables. Shubha, go ahead.
Because as the oldest member of the group, there is some history to it. Ocean color became the name of the field many years ago when oceanographers sort of had the lead. But I remember that many years ago, the IUCCG had a big discussion about whether the name should be changed. And some of us, including Trevor, had suggested that it was not sufficiently representative, that perhaps the right term for it might be spectral radiometric measurements, or visible spectral reflectance, something like that. But our survey at the time was predominantly the ocean community again, because ocean scientists were doing this more. So we got pushback, and the only concession that was made at the time is, instead of just saying ocean color, you were advised to say ocean color radiometry to indicate that this was radiometry. But today, I regret that decision. It is still too limiting, and it is not inclusive of inland waters. And inland waters have their own problems as well that are not necessarily completely covered by ocean color measurements. So I would suggest something like aquatic radiometric measurements or aquatic color measurements, which will be more inclusive. I even thought of watercolor, but then watercolor could be the artist painting using watercolor, so that's confusing. Anyway, that's my thought on the subject. But changing a domain name is very difficult, right? It is like turning a plane when it is landed. It takes a lot of effort to rotate it. Anyway, there you go.
Okay, so I think I've covered most questions. There's a question coming in about data availability that we've already answered. So please rewatch the video and you'll get a detailed answer from Grinson on that one. Did I miss any questions, TJ, or I think we've covered all of them?
You got most of them as far as I can see.
Okay, perfect. So I think we'll wrap up this session. Thank you to Grinson for his wonderful presentation and for answering questions. And thank you to all the panelists for chipping in. I think we had a good discussion and I hope that everyone enjoyed it. That's the end. Thanks everyone and see you next week.